everyone, so this video is going to be about my results on GEDMatch. I did this a few years ago, but I didn't really check on it because I didn't really know how to read it. Pretty much with GEDMatch you have to upload your Ancestry kit or results from either Ancestry, 23andMe, or some of the other sites, and you put it here where GEDMatch will break down your results in many different ways, and they have many different calculators that will show you many different things. So I'm ethnically Jamaican, so the average Jamaican is Sub-Saharan African, European, and either East or South Asian. So I'm going to use a few calculators that focuses on what would show the best results for a Jamaican person. So the first calculator that I wanted to use is Ethiohelix, and this is the calculator that is mainly used to delve into African ancestry. But the main thing with this calculator is that it is for someone who is 100% African ancestry-wise, but I don't fit that. Why did I decide to do Ethiohelix anyways? I did because I wanted to know more about where my African heritage came from, since at least up until recently, a lot of the DNA tests don't do well with discussing or showing different ethnic tribes that are from Sub-Saharan or Africa in general. So I'm going to show a chart, and the main thing that I wanted to get is the ancestry and the tribes from it. So if you look at this chart, obviously most of it comes from West Africa, which makes sense just based on the location. But the next biggest is Biaka Pygmy, and from what I researched there, that is mainly Central African ancestry, and that makes sense if you know anything about the slave trade, since they came from either West or Central Africa. So one of the issues with Ethiohelix, if you have any type of admixture where it could be 5% admixture or 65% admixture, is that they will place that admixture into other categories. So if you're using the African-only Ethiohelix, they will put that admixture into North Africa. If you use the other Ethiohelix, where some of the other calculators have Ethiohelix French Oracle, or plus French, Ethiohelix plus Japanese, or Ethiohelix plus Palestinian, all of your non-African admixture will go into the plus other, whether that could be the plus Palestinian, the plus Japanese, or the plus French. So it's really not accurate for people with any sort of admixture. On the first chart, it says my minor admixture is North African. On the second chart, it says my minor admixture is French. On my third chart, it says my minor admixture is Japanese. And on my fourth one, it says my minor admixture is Palestinian. And I know from all of my other testing and just from family research, all of this is inaccurate, so that is a flaw. If you click on the oracle and look at the mixed mode population sharings, would be based on a primary and a secondary population source, you'll see that the admixture that they'll give you will tend to be North African, especially if you're only using the Africa only oracle. So that's another way where you can see the inaccuracy. So the single population sharing is pretty much a tool where if you were to look at one source as to where your genetic makeup is close to when it comes to a tribe of people or a group of people, which group of people will be the most similar to yours based off your ancestry or admixture amount. And for number one, I have the Fang people, where according to my minor research, they are a group that is found in Equatorial Guinea, North Gabon, and Southern Cameroon. And looking at that map, you can definitely kind of see how it's in that Central Africa region. And then we have the Congo with a K group, where they are generally found in the Democratic Republic of Congo, or Angola, also pretty much still in that Central Africa region. And the final group is the Bamon group, which from my brief research, they are in Cameroon, which makes sense since that's a very common country. And that's also in Central Africa. So it's interesting that based off of my results, they listed me as 3 Central African groups instead of West African groups. So I guess that's something I have to do more research on later. So there is some calculators that best fit for people with slight or overwhelming admixture. And since this is a channel mainly about Caribbean people or the Black diaspora, mainly referring to the New World as I am a Jamaican descendant, the calculator that is best for New World Black people to use is Dodecad, since obviously it's going to go in depth about your African ancestry, but it's also going to cover your admixture as well, which may consist of European or Asian. So that's definitely the best one to use for New World Black people, essentially. So as you see, there are 5 calculators within the Dodecad branch, and I'm going to show you some results using all 5 of the branches regarding my ancestry results. So when it comes to the Dodecad V3, I am skipping that because that's going back to like Paleolithic or Neolithic African times, and I don't care about ancestry from way back when we were cave people, so I'm going to move from that. Africa 9 Oracle is pretty much the same, where it's heavily focusing on Africa. So I'm going to focus on the following 3. So we're going to get to... So here are my results for the World 9 Oracle results. So the general admixture result is 87.68 African. I usually get around 90% African when I do my ancestry and from what I remember on my 23andMe results. And even on my other results, I got like 90 or 91%. So this number is a bit less. South Asian being 4.91, not shocked because that usually shows up on damn near all of my ancestry tests, and based on my family lineage, I do know that the South Asian is correct since there's an Indo-Jamaican pipeline there. Southern, I have no idea what this is. It doesn't state what part, like Southern of what? Southern what? Because me just stating southern, that could mean Antarctica, because that's technically the most southern place in the world, but obviously that's not the case. Is it Southern African, Southern European? It doesn't mention it, so I don't know what I'm supposed to get from that. Caucasus, so obviously from the Caucasus Mountains, that's kind of shocking, but I guess when you go back in time, like the Europeans came directly from the Caucasus Mountains, so maybe that's where that came from. Kind of the same thing with the Siberians. It's obviously this like northern Eurasia, pretty much. And then Atlantic Baltic, that's not surprising because that's the northwestern European ancestry there. That's usually where it's from, so that I definitely did expect. So looking at my top 3 groups, apparently San-He people kind of represents the Khoisan people who live in Namibia, maybe Botswana, and South Africa. I have no idea how this came up because I do not have any lineage from South Africa. But I guess if they're basing this on if they combined all of my admixture into the most similar group, this would be it, which interesting. I don't know if it's because in that area there is some European and Asian admixture, but it wouldn't be the same because different time periods, different admixtures, different groups of people. I don't know. So I looked up what ACB30 is, and apparently this calculator is kind of similar to the Dominican calculator. And from what I researched, this calculator is African, Caribbean, Barbados, or at least that's what it said. That definitely makes sense, and that's definitely where my lineage not Barbados, but that area. I'm definitely Afro-Caribbean on all ends, and this apparently came from the 1000 Genomes Project. So African Caribbean definitely fits. Though African Caribbean, Barbados, wrong country, but I know Barbados and Jamaica is very similar when it comes to their admixture and all that jazz. So I am focusing on the Anglo-Caribbean countries, and they are mainly overwhelmingly African with minor European ancestry. Some pockets have some Asian ancestry or admixture as well. So obviously I would fit closest to this because this is my group. And the third group of people is the Hadza people, or I think it says, yes, it's Hadza people, so pretty much Hadza. They are a hunter-gatherer group from Tanzania, and they're in Tanzania. I have no idea where this came from because I don't have any ancestry from Tanzania, but like I said, with the first group, I'm assuming based on if they're combining all of my admixtures into one specific population group, this would be it. Okay, I do think I get why they linked me with these people. Obviously, it is well known that the Horn of Africa is heavily admixed, but in the southern part of the Horn of Africa, they have a lot less of that Eurasian slash MENA DNA and a lot more of the ancient African DNA. So with the Hata people in Tanzania being right outside of the Horn of Africa, they probably are still overwhelmingly native Africa, and whatever amount of admixture that they have from Eurasia is very minimal. So I get the comparison now, despite it not being my direct mix, or the references of people are not the exact same. So now it is time to look at the mixed mode population sharing, which is based off them determining if they were to base your ancestry solely off of two sources, what would be the most similar to? So pretty much they combine two sources, so a primary source and a secondary source. Once they combine those two sources based off the accurate admixture amount, see what would be accurate regarding the distance between that mixture of a group and your ancestry slash admixture. So for me, on the right side, my primary population is the Mandinka people. And just from that, like, okay, it's interesting that it's all in one place. But I had to look up what Mandinka is or who they are. And just from my brief research, they are people, or the people who live in Senegal and Mali primarily. There might be some interlay with Gamibia, which makes sense based on the area. Some could be in Guinea-Bissau and Guinea as well. So pretty much the people in this group. I do find it interesting because I do recall taking another ancestry test, and it did link me to this area based off of my admixture. And I do know that I have a bit of Mali on all of my ancestry results, so it's interesting that I picked that up. But just based off of the map of Africa, I do believe these group of people have a bit more admixture than some other West Africans, just because they're kind of close to the Sahara Desert. So I'm assuming that might be why. But that is the primary group. Looking up the secondary group was kind of hard. I saw a lot of Mets-Palu words here, but I tried searching it up. I got absolutely nothing. Muslim, I didn't search up, but I typed up Taurus people, and apparently this is the Taru people, which is an ethnic group indigenous to the Terai in southern Nepal and northern India. So I guess northern India, that makes sense. And with Nepal being right above North India, obviously there'd be some interlay there. And then the next group that I looked up is Brahmins from Tamil Nadu, and pretty much they're the Brahmin people in India, and there's a large Brahmin admixture all over India, but it's most prominent in North India. And just from my recollection, I did have some Northern Indian in my admixture. I got some Southern too, but when it came to the indentured servitude from India to Jamaica, I was shocked to find out that a lot of them came from Northern India, so I'm assuming this is the area where they came from. So that pretty much makes sense. And then I looked up the Darkest people, and then it took me to the Gurkha people. And from the little that I saw here, It pretty much attaches to the people in the Indian subcontinent, pretty much the same place as the other, where it says they resided in Nepal and northern India. So that all kind of just adds up there. And as you see from the percentage amounts, it says 91.3% Mandinka, which definitely makes sense with all of my Ancestry results, and then 8.7 South Asia. Essentially, this number is a bit larger than my Ancestry results because usually you have like 2 to 3% European. The European is rarely picked up upon here. It's just mainly and heavily picked up on South Asia. So I'm wondering if some of that, the 2 to 3% European, went into the South Asian, since I do know that northern India has a bit more Eurasian DNA than southern India. So I'm assuming that's what happened here. Okay, so there's another button at the bottom that you can click where it'll show the 4 ancestors oracles. So the point of this is where in the past it usually just used 1 or 2 primary sources for populations to determine what your admixture would be closest to if those merged. This one can do up to 4. So I'm going to show you the results of what mine would look like if I had 3 or 4 sources for populations. So for the 3 population sources, it has me at 50% Hadza He, plus 25% San He, and plus 25% San He, which has the number of 4.73. So that's a very close number. So I already talked about these communities a few bits ago. They're pretty much the African sources that they linked me to when it came to the Seoul population reference points. So it's just combining some of the top 2 or 3 here, which caused for the 3 population approximation to show up here. And when it comes to the 4 population approximation, it's pretty much the same thing, where the first one has LWK 30 Bihar plus Hadza He plus 2 times San He. Pretty much the same thing with that equation with number 2, but we replace the LWK with the Mandinka. Pretty much the same thing, but you replace that with Bantu. So it's pretty much a whole bunch of the African sources that are on the top of my list when it came to the 1 population reference point. Okay, so now I'm going to do a different type of Dodecad calculator, where this one is Dodecad K21B. And if you can look at this, it does split up the ancestry groups a bit more, where it's not all just Africa. We have Sub-Saharan Africa and East Africa and Northwest African all being separated. So it states here that I'm 85.41% Sub-Saharan African. That's really not shocking. That's a bit less than my usual result. But like I mentioned, they split the African into separate parts here. So when you combine all the African, it adds up to the rough 90% that I usually get. East African is 4.01%. I'm wondering if this is in reference to the Horn of Africa or just the East Africa that's below the Horn of Africa. It doesn't really distinguish what type or where in East Africa they're really referring to in this. So I found that to be pretty interesting. And then I got 1.38 Northwest African. I know Northwest Africa, that's like Morocco and Algeria. That somewhat makes sense because if you look at the Arab slave trade and how that trade went, people who were in West Africa went to North Africa, and Northwest Africa is right above West Africa, so that kind of makes sense there. Yet again, I get Jedrosia and Siberia, and that's like the Caucasus Mountains and North Eurasia. That's kind of weird because those aren't in my results, but maybe with the minor European that I do get on all of my results, it picks that up as these 2 categories. And then yet again, it has South Asian, which is 4.22%, which pretty much lines up with my Ancestry results in general. So that kind of all makes sense there. So now I'm going to go into the single population sharing results, and I'm going to go over like the first 5 results. So the first one is ASW30, and I had to look up what this is, and apparently it is African American, which makes sense because African Americans on average are overwhelmingly African with minor European admixture or Amerindian admixture, where the Sub-Saharan Africans usually around 80-ish%. Could be more, could be less, and based on the slave trade where some people did travel from the States to the Caribbean or the Caribbean and the States, this definitely makes sense as to why I would be the closest to them with this calculation. So I had to look up what Bantu SW, which I'm assuming is Southwest Herero, and Bantu SC, which I'm assuming is Southeast Tswana. And from what I could gather, this is apparently South Africa. So this is the also closest reference point to there. I don't know if this is the case because South Africans might have a bit of admixture that's different from West or East Africans. I don't really know if that's the case. I already discussed the Mandinka group, so I'm going to move on to the Yoruba, which is number 5, and I believe number 6 is another version of Yoruba. Obviously, Yoruba is one of the most common African tribes that New World Black people are associated with, since a lot of the slaves that were taken from the continent to the Western world were Yorubans, so that kind of makes sense why I would get them too, though the number at 19 is a lot higher than like the African American group. So yeah. So when it comes to my mixed mode population sharing regarding the primary and secondary resources, the primary is pretty much like 90-ish%. All but one of it is Bantu, which I discussed earlier, and the one that isn't is Mandinka, which I discussed pretty early on in the video. From like 88 to 93%, kind of makes sense with the amount of sub-Saharan African that I generally always get. And then when it comes to my secondary population, everything on the right is some type of Indian. Most of it's usually Northern Indian, which really isn't a surprise to me, especially at this point, though, to varying degrees from around 6% to 11%, though most of them are around 6%. And the distance is all in the 5 range, and they're all very, very close. So it just shows that this is very close to my admixture when it comes to pinning down two sources and the combination of them. But then when it comes to my 4-answer oracle results with Dodecad K12, it's relatively interesting, though some of the results aren't the most surprising. When it comes to the one population source, of course the 3 Bantu comes up, and then the 4th one is ASW, which, as I discussed prior, that is African American, and then the 5th one is another South African Bantu source. And then scrolling down to the 2 populations, it's pretty much a 50% African American plus 50% Bantu. And then using the 3 populations, again, it's pretty much the same thing as the 2 population, but they split the 50% Bantu for the 2 population approximation into 2. So it's 3 with the 50% African American, then the 25% South African Bantu, and then another 25% Bantu. And then once you get to the 4 population approximations, they pretty much just split up the African American into 2. So it's 2 African American plus 2 Bantu. So it's pretty much the same thing as the 2 populations, but they pretty much just split both groups into 2. So it goes from 2 populations to 4. So yeah. So I'm going to do another calculator, and this one is the PuntDNAL. Apparently this one goes a lot more into like the caveman times and the prehistoric ancestry. I'm not really interested in that, but there are some calculators that lean more towards modern population, so that's what I'm going to do, as I'm using PuntDNAL K15. So as you can see here, I'm obviously overwhelmingly West African, where it has me at 81.6% West African. I had to search up what WHT Nile River is. That's apparently the White Nile River, and that's apparently by East Africa. So not in the North Africa area, but like the Sudan and Tanzania, that kind of area there. 6%, so I'm guessing that's where some of my African, that's usually 90% on my other tests, split off into. The Omo River, I have no idea what that is. That's by Ethiopia, so it's kind of like Horn of Africa, so I guess that kind of adds to the White Nile River area. South Indian, I'm not shocked, that's 3.17%. Mediterranean, so I'm assuming that's either like the North African or maybe some of my European ancestry went there. Caucasian, I'm assuming that kind of just leans towards that. East Asian, I'm assuming that's kind of like the leftover from the South Asian. Siberian, that's left over from the white DNA. And then South Africa is 0.52. My Northeast, Northeast is not your Northwest European. Okay, so that's pretty much it for that group. So now it's time to talk about my single population source report. So I already talked about the Bamoon and the Mandinka groups earlier on in the video, so I'm going to kind of just move on from there. The second group is Hausa at 6.39. That is the top right map image there. The third one is Igbo. Obviously, Igbo is one of the most popular regions when it comes to New World Black people, when it comes to the tribes that they get once they go back and look at their ancestry results, because a lot of the slaves were taken from Nigeria, which wasn't a country when the slave trade started, so they took a lot of Igbo people. So this really isn't shocking to me at all. And it's in Nigeria. The next group is the Bambaran group of people, and it looks like it's in Mali from the little I see here, maybe a bit of Mauritania. Yeah, primarily Mali, and it makes sense because Mali generally shows up in a lot of Afro-Caribbean and Afro-American people, so that makes sense. Speaking of African-American, that's definitely one of the results here. I noticed that there isn't like a Jamaican or a Bahamian or a Caribbean or Afro-Caribbean result in this specific calculator, so African-American showing up instead definitely makes sense. And then the Bronx group, that is a tribal ethnic group that is in Ghana, and that makes sense since Ghana is one of the most populous countries when it comes to the admixture of sub-Saharan Africa in black people in the New World. So that really isn't shocking at all. And I already discussed the Mandinka group. So, I don't have a whole lot to say about the mixed mode population sharing, especially since it's generally a lot of the similar groups, especially when it comes to the secondary population. Many of them is similar, but the few that are interesting to me is the Romani results. And I'm assuming that the Romani is coming up because Romanis in general are mixed with South Asian and West Eurasian, whether that could be Middle Eastern or just general European. So I know for a fact that I have European and South Asian admixture. So I'm assuming that those two within small amounts being combined together, this calculator attributed that to Romani. The first one is Bengali for the secondary population. That definitely shows up on quite a few of my ancestry results, so that's really not shocking. Obviously, Bangladesh, like 80 to 90 years ago, was a part of India, so that really not surprising. All the other groupings here that show up for the secondary population I've seen on prior tests. I believe Uttar Pradesh is definitely one of the more popular Pradeshes when it came to the people who migrated from India to Jamaica, so that's not surprising. So when it comes to the primary population, this is interesting as I see a lot of Igbo, which definitely makes sense because a lot of New World Black people, whether they're from America or the Caribbean or even South America, they have Igbo on the results. Especially Anglo Black people, they generally have Igbo on the results. Bambaran is definitely one that's not as common or it's not as well known as Igbo, but based on the fact that Bambaran people are in Ghana and Ghana definitely shows up on a lot of our ancestry results, that in itself really isn't shocking either. So the results make sense when it comes to the primary population being roughly 92 to 93%, and then the secondary population being 5 to 7% with that admixture. And then the distance between all this is between 2.5 to 2.9. So it's very, 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 very close. So I clicked on the 4 answers oracle code to see what will show up. I don't have much to say about the one population approximation, so I'm going to talk about the other ones. So when it comes to the 2 population approximation, what's interesting is that it has me at 50% African American and 50% Bambaran, and as we just discussed, that is Ghanaian essentially. But then when you split it into the 3 population approximation, it has me at 50% African American, 25% Bamoon, which is... No, I think that's something else. That's another West African group. And then Mandinka shows up as well. And then when you're looking at the 4 population approximation, African Americans generally the biggest one or the most common one. Then I see Bamoon as the second most common one that shows up. I see a bit of Hassas, I see a bit of Ibus, I see a bit of Bambarans, I see a bit of Bronx. So that's kind of just a conglomeration that is showing up here. Thank you to everyone who listened to this. I definitely encourage everyone, no matter what racial makeup you are, to take the GEDMatch results. It's definitely interesting where you'll be able to see what types of ethnicities or races that you are mixed with through the various tests, combining all the admixtures to see what single population group that you would be closest to if all of your results are pinned directly into one group. That's something that's interesting to look at, how that would be split up if you essentially had two parents from two different areas, how that would look like. And then it pretty much did the same thing of if you had four grandparents, where they would come from to add up to your admixture. It's very interesting to look at, and I'm definitely going to be doing more videos like this soon. So thank you all for watching, and take care.